So how are things in the comic world for you guys? What's going on with the board?
Well, we're working on the 4th issue. We're working with a really talented artist from Turkey right now by the name of Hus. And he's worked on a few comics for Boom, like a Hellraiser comic. I think it was a Hellraiser bestiary thing or something like that. And so he's kind of up and coming. We have a tendency to start working with artists who are on the rise, and then they get too big for us.
Oh, bummer. I just realized I should have you introduce yourself and say who you are and what you do.
Okay. I'm Jenz Lund, and I'm the writer-creator of a comic book called Blood Gourd. And it's about pumpkins taking over the Pacific Northwest.
Oh. Now, you grew up in Olympia, right? That's
right there. One of the little redneck towns near Olympia.
Which one?
Shelton.
Ah, yes. That's actually where my folks live now.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm proud to be where I'm from. But Olympia was sort of my getaway. Mm-hmm. It was my escape.
Right. So I have a bunch of questions that customers have sent in. So I'm going to go ahead and start with those. The first one is, what made you want to write a story about, mutated pumpkins taking over the Pacific Northwest?
I just really love Halloween. And I feel like pumpkins weren't being really used a whole lot, Mm-hmm. People compare us to Attack of the Killer Tomatoes and things like that, which is fine. I think that's great. But ultimately, it's not about vegetables. It's about loving Halloween. And it's my favorite time of the year. And we saw a lot of potential with what we could do with pumpkins. And it seems to work out pretty well.
Cool. What other parts of Halloween are your favorite parts?
A lot of the stuff we try to put in there. I mean, I've always been a huge fan of horror movies, of course, and I love the occult. And there's nothing I don't love about Halloween, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm. What when you're creating a book, what kind of things, you were talking a little bit about having illustrators come on. What kind of things do you look for in an illustrator?
Something unique. I wish I had the talent to draw myself, but I think the eye to get a taste of something a little bit different. I've always wanted to make movies. I still look forward to that day arriving when I'll start making more films. But you can just tell when someone's got a little something extra. And the first person to work on the first issue was Dave Acosta, and he sort of had this classic kind of comic book style that we wanted at the time. And that worked really well for that. And then we moved on to Juan and Ramirez for the second issue. Juan and Ramirez also did both covers of issue 1 and 2. And we're like, let's see if we could get him to do the whole book for issue 2. And he did. And it's stunning. Mm-hmm. And then Jonas Scharf, he's really a big deal now. And we got him right on the cusp of him breaking big. Now he's full-time at Marvel doing Avengers comics and all this other stuff. But at the time he had just done, what was he working on at the time? He had done a Power Rangers issue and some stuff like that. But he got more famous for Bone Parish, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so he did that right after he drew our book, and now he's, like I said, it's a big deal. So,
is there any point with any of like artists and things, or is there a point you ever see yourself that you will have someone who's more an artist that's more of a collaborator versus just a work for hire, or is that not a thing you see at some point with your work?
Honestly, that's what I'm always looking for. And I was really bummed about Jonas Scharf I'm happy for him. I'm happy for everybody who moves on. But we were collaborating, man, and it was fantastic. The guy should be storyboarding motion pictures. Here's my big prediction for comic shops everywhere. Jonas Scharf is going to be a star. He's going to be one of the biggest comic artists of the next 10 years. I'm positive of that.
And we knew him when.
What's that?
I said, and we knew him when.
We knew him when. Yep. As well as you can know someone who's all the way in Germany and you just talk to them through emails, but yeah.
So you talked a little bit about why you love Halloween. What is it you like most about Pacific Northwest?
Probably the essence of it. I grew up in the woods, basically. and it's just different. It's just such a different experience than any other place I've ever been. And I've actually had the opportunity to broaden my scope of the world a little more the older I got. And man, right now I'm in Iowa with my wife, and she's doing her residency and all this stuff. But man, I miss it so much. And that's what's great about Blood and Gourd. I've been kind of on this trip with her for a while, going through her whole process. And it makes me homesick for the Pacific Northwest, and it makes me appreciate it probably more than if I was actually there right now. You know, it's a feeling. I feel like I always go back to Twin Peaks, because I feel like that show captures the essence of what it's really sort of like to live there. And I can't articulate it very well, but you can feel it in that original Twin Peaks, especially the first season of Twin Peaks. It's just there. You feel it. It's you have to be there to experience it.
That's one of the things I noticed the first time I left the Northwest. When I came back, it felt like there was like actual water in the air. Like I took a breath and I was like, I'm home. I can feel the air again.
And honestly, I'm drying out here. In fact, my wife says I'm an octopus, because I can only come out of the water for so long till I have to go back and hide in a cave somewhere. You know, I'm like, I really am sort of that way. And I'm drying out here, man. I mean, I grew up in a rainforest, you know? It's so dry in Iowa.
Yeah, I don't think I would do well in the anywhere but here. I think there's something very special about this area. And we're seeing it a lot this week, because it's been rainy and then 70, and then rainy and then 70. It's been insane. So what is your first comic book memory?
Actually, pretty happy one. 7-Eleven. And I remember my mom got a job at 7-Eleven, and that was one of the things. She'd work night shift, and then she'd bring me home a comic book or something like that, and it was awesome. I remember some of those old Batman comics. Like I remember the very first issue with the Scarecrow that I read, and he had this sonic skull that made people see everything they were ever terrified of, you know, and that just was making my brain go wild. And then I would get these reprints of Tales from the Crypt, Valda Horror. I mean, let's face it, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing.
It explains a lot.
It really does. And I would say, what is it? I sometimes mess up the title, but it's like, what is it? Tales from the Haunted House or something like that. And it was a DC thing. And there was one in particular actually had pumpkin and demons. And I know that for years I couldn't even find this thing, because it was like my 6-year-old memory, you know. And I finally got my hands on it a couple years back, and it's like you can definitely see that it was setting in place, I don't know, everything that I was gonna do with my life, I guess.
We had a customer who came in the other day looking for Pumpkinhead or Pumpkin Lord or Pumpkin something, and it was Blood and Gourd.
Really?
So, yeah. So it's always interesting to see what bits of pieces you keep from, like, when you just see a thing. So you are someone's favorite comic memory now, once he got the comic in his hand.
You know, and that's why I do what I do, because it's like I really want to capture people's imaginations. I want the next kid to read a copy of Blood and Gourd and go, I want to make my pumpkin thing in 20 years. You know what I mean? It means a lot to me. I think that what you do is absolutely essential to what I do, because you make it possible. You make it real, man. You've done so much for the community, and I just a ton of respect. And I remember talking to you initially early in the day when I was talking about even making this thing, and you're like, hey man, I'll tell you what, you do it. And yeah, I'll do what I can for you. You know, I'll let you do a signing. I'll, you know, whatever you need, just you should go do that. And I just want to thank you for that.
Thank you. That's sweet. I'm glad. And you're doing well, and I'm happy and I'm proud of you. So that's awesome. I love this story. I love that you started a thing and it's on the shelf, and I love walking by it and going, yeah, that's our boy. So that's awesome. Is there any characters or anything like that you think you might want to move on to someday? Either something that you're creating or something that you'd like to work for with Marvel or DC or Image?
I would love to do a story about an organization that, okay, so you know how things only seem to get fixed in the government when something bad happens to rich people or some senator or something?
I've heard that.
Okay, so what if there was an evil organization, but they're only sort of evil because the reason they make bridges collapse on people and stuff is because they'll do it to some they'll take a senator and they'll make it collapse on a senator so people actually do something to fix like the crumbling infrastructure or something like that. I think this would be an awesome story to tell if this was Batman or any superhero like known, especially Batman, I think, going after this organization. And the more he digs into it, the more he's like, oh my God, they're actually trying to make things better for regular people. Like, cause it's like, I mean, if this is exactly what we're living through right now, is people aren't getting what they need to survive. And I don't want to get overly political, because I'm kind of angry at both parties. But when all is said and done, I feel like that's what we need to challenge the convention of this good and evil gray stuff. We need to go a little deeper to what would Batman be dealing with now? What would Punisher be dealing with now? Like, who do you go after,
Well, yeah, and, maybe Authority would be a good team to work on that as far as doing that sort of thing. Although Authority is basically a bunch of Batmans together, but I love that book. What's keeping you from doing it?
Well, Marvel doesn't care what I'm doing. DC doesn't care what I'm doing. I'm not saying they won't always, but maybe someday. Also, they don't really like, from what I understand, they don't go, oh, here's your story, let's go make that. They're more like, well, here's what we do. Would you write for that? That's what I understand. So I'll probably be in the indie world for a long time. But that being said, I am working on some really great stories right now. I hope they'll be great. One of them I'm really proud of. It's going to be a short story about feral chihuahuas attacking a small town.
Okay.
And it's going to be called Tasty Bits. And it should be really good. I'm really proud of it. That's one of the reasons why I have the writer beard. I mean, I'm doing the social distancing, I'm not shaving at all because I'm almost done with this short story that I think is going to be something special. And then I also have a Western I'm working on called Goblin in the Hen House. I can't just write a Western. I got to add goblins to it too.
Oh, well, yeah, duh. What's that one about?
That's actually about a bunch of gunslingers and the return of, basically it's going to be a gunslinging competition to see who's going to be the greatest gunslinger, but the devil's involved. And it starts off with this old abandoned mine where they kept the goblins at bay and they kept them in there and people left them alone. But now the goblins are starting to come out, and we find out later it's because that is a direct connection to hell. And it should be a lot of fun, man. I love the good, the bad, and the ugly and all those spaghetti westerns. And I really want to do a Western. And like I said, or have some supernatural element to it, or I'm just going to get bored. So.
Fair enough. Why would you ever want to do something just straightforward?
Yeah, because easy or something. I got to keep it complicated.
That's what makes it good. So one of my favorite questions is, what's your favorite breakfast?
My favorite breakfast. I like to cook breakfast more than I like eating it. I feel like it's the only thing I know how to cook. So I don't know. I like the challenge of making a breakfast, but let's see. Any kind of breakfast. I love breakfast too. I really do. I love every aspect of breakfast. At the end of the day,
Be the beginning of the day.
I don't know, man. That's tough. I guess I would have to say my favorite breakfast is probably, I don't know, probably just old school hotcakes and soccer and all that kind of stuff. I don't know.
It's always interesting to see how people answer it, but it almost always comes back to pancakes, bacon, eggs, that sort of thing.
And I don't eat a lot of meat, so if I'm eating sausage and pancakes, it's a special occasion.
Well, there you have it.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about what story you'd want to write. Is there any character that you would just love to, I'm going to guess like Punisher or Batman, but is there any character that you would love to have free reign and just write a story?
That's a really excellent question. I wish I would have thought about that a little bit longer. I love Spider-Man. I always have.
Oh, nice.
I feel like there's a ton of potential. And I would be completely dishonest if I didn't say that a lot of my Halloween love and a lot of this comic book stuff comes from Spider-Man versus the Green Goblin stuff. I love the Green Goblin so freaking much. I do. It's classic storytelling. And what I love most about it, the death of Gwen Stacy stuff is still, as far as I am concerned, is about as good as comic book storytelling can get. And it's still over the top. It's still cheesy. But what makes it great to me is the fact that you can take a ridiculous character like the Green Goblin, who dresses in purple and he flies around on a little bat glider and he's goofy and he makes silly one-liners, but you can still evoke emotion with a character like that. You can still have him murder somebody close to Peter Parker. You can still have Peter Parker lose it and actually inadvertently kill him. And at the end of it, you're putting down a comic book going, oh my God, what did I just experience? To me, that's like taking comics to a cinematic place. Like normally you'd expect to get that from a movie. Mm-hmm. That whole death of Gwen Stacy stuff, I love 60s Marvel. I really do. That's where my heart is. 60s, 70s Marvel is just so good. I love every aspect of it.
How do you think the movies measure up to the comics?
They're just different. At first, I was like, I don't like them. I really don't. And it was because I had this kind of foregone conclusion of how things should go, I guess, or like how things should look. But it's just a mutation. It's just something else. I will always be partial to the original stories. But that being said, they make a lot of people happy, man. A lot of people, that's like something that helps get them out of bed in the morning. So I'd be a real jerk to go, those aren't as good as they could be. I think that they do exactly what they're designed to do when they entertain. And I like a little more depth. That's why like The Dark Knight is still probably my favorite comic book movie of all time, because it captures the essence of Gotham City. You really believe that there's a Joker out there. It's just good, man. I love The Dark Knight. And I'd have to say that Superman 2 is probably my second favorite comic book movie of all time, because it's over the top and cheesy, but so much fun. And still has some high stakes too.
Is that the one where he goes backwards?
That was the first one. That was the original one. The part two is the one that has Lord Zod and all that stuff from Krypton, which is just so great. I mean, it starts off with them touching down on the moon and killing astronauts, and it's so fun. I love that.
Well, I like how animated you get, because it shows how much you love it. And that's one of the things I really like about this industry is we can enjoy it and have this kind of a conversation and both be giddy and silly and stuff like that. And it's respected. So I like that. What are you reading right now?
What am I reading right now? Actually, I've been reading a thing about like a biography on the Coen brothers. Nothing really comic related right now. Like I said, I'm also in the thick of finishing my Chihuahua story. And so that's kind of where everything's directed at this point. But one of the things I do for inspiration too is Alan Moore is still probably my favorite comic book writer. And that sounds cliche, but I'm sorry, man. He's as good as it gets. He really is. He's fantastic. So I love rereading those old Swamp Thing comics that Alan Moore did. They just, I don't know.
Well, it's telling, because every person that I've talked to, like interview-wise or prepping for interview, has brought up the Swamp Thing.
Yeah.
So I feel like he is a lot of people's, I don't know if muse is the right word, but very much in that realm. Can you talk a little bit about your process? So like right now you're in the middle of Killer Chihuahuas. So you write the story and then you call people you think would be good at drawing it, or do you ever write the story with a certain artist in mind, or kind of what is your process?
A lot of the time I need to be inspired to work on something. And I had, it all started with this basic idea of an old woman who was taking care of all these Chihuahuas. And so it always starts off as like this little kernel, right? So I just pictured, and it being horror, of course, I've got to take it to a weird place. So she's feeding these Chihuahuas, and her health is declining, and she's going blinder, and maybe she's losing sensitivity to her fingers. So she doesn't realize that the Chihuahuas have been slowly eating her fingers, And then this is where this starts. I'm like, well, what would I do with this? And then I take it someplace else, and then I start asking, usually like friends and people that I trust their opinion, like, what do you think about this? Do you think I could take Killer Chihuahuas to a place that people would want to read? And a lot of the time they're like, Yeah, I think you should go forward with that. So what I do is I suffer, I suffer because anybody who tells you that writing is easy is they don't even know what they're talking about. It's a miserable process. The ideas are fun. Actually putting it together in something like, coherent that people can actually follow. That's the tricky part. And then you have to start killing off all the stuff that you loved about your story initially. Like all of a sudden these original ideas, like, but it wouldn't work without that. You got to get rid of that stuff because at the end of the day, the stuff that seems important to you, is it? Because it's like a form of telepathy. That's how Stephen King described it in his book on writing, and I totally agree. So it's tricky hitting that sweet spot of, is it going to be interesting enough for people, but are they going to be able to follow it? So anyway, long story short, I go through that miserable process for weeks, sometimes months, sometimes years. And once it gets to a place where I know that it's cohesive and there's a flow to it, that's when I start calling people. And but man, I bug people to read drafts of it over and over again. My poor wife, of course, is the first person that gets hit with all that stuff. And the guy you're with, he's a writer as well, right? He writes for comics, so I'm sure he hits you with everything probably right out the gate. I'm assuming. But yeah,
he's got more critical people in his world that he hits with. Yeah. I'm not very critical, so I don't get the drafts as often because he really is looking for someone critical. Whereas I'm like, I mean, it's fine. I don't see any major stuff. And I'm just not that person. So I wouldn't make a good editor.
My wife is brutally honest. She'll tell me if something sucks. And I know that it's a winning thing if she laughs. Like if I can make her laugh or if I can even make her tear up. I think I've done that once. No, it's probably gonna be pretty good. So.
I think the only time Eric ever actively sought my opinion, I guess, is when he was writing a story that was loosely based on my brother. And so he wanted I just want to make sure that nobody's gonna hate me at Thanksgiving dinner. We good? Does this sound right? Yeah. But other than that, he's pretty. He goes to his more harsh critics, I think. So, because he's got a way thicker skin than I do.
That's about writers like David Sedaris and stuff, because they tell you need to directly just use everything that's embarrassing, and you'll be a great writer, and people will buy it.
Well, it seems to have worked pretty well, as at least as far as Eric's concerned. He enjoys writing. Parts of it, but he says it's you're called to it. It's not a fun thing. It's not a hey, I'm gonna write the great American novel and then that's it. Matter of fact, he laughs every time there's a commercial about things you can do during the lockdown, and one of them is write that book you've been meaning to, and every time he just is like, no, that's not how that works.
It's a good time to get started on it, maybe, but it might be another 30 years before you get it where you want it. I don't know. And that's what's scary about it, too, because no one's really there to tell you, hey, you're putting way too much thought into this. Hey, you're overdoing it. It's going to be you. And at the end of the day, it's just, I don't know. It's a hell of a process. And I think that the only people who should partake in it are people who really get enjoyment out of doing it anyway. They would be writing no matter what, whether they had a deal or whatever, they would still be doing it.
Writers gotta write.
Writers gotta write. They do.
So what point was it that you felt like this is what you wanted to do? Like that you wanted to be a writer and you wanted that misery?
That's the thing. I don't even know if I consider myself really a writer yet because I'm just a guy who's written some stuff, and I keep writing, so I guess I sort of write. But all bets are off, man. To me, it's about just trying to put something together that people can enjoy. Like I said, I would like to be working on movies. I like to write songs. I do a ton of writing of songs, that kind of stuff as well. So I just like to create things, at the end of the day. I just want to always be creating because I know if I'm not doing that, I'm miserable. In fact, I'm impossible to be around if I don't have some project going on.
Mm-hmm. How have you seen the industry kind of change? As an indie writer, is it more difficult? Is it easier to get into shops? Is the internet helpful? Diamond stuff. How have you seen the industry change in the last 5 or 6 years?
That's an interesting thing because we're still outsiders. I mean, no, we haven't been. We've got a bunch of really amazing fans, and we continue to put stuff out, which is great. And we seem to do well when we kickstart this stuff. But honestly, every publishing deal that's been put before us, it fell through at the last minute, whether we turned it down or they decided they weren't interested in the long term, or the publisher went bankrupt. It's just, it's insane, dude. I don't even know what's going to be happening. That's why at the end of the day, if making a comic about killer pumpkins is making you happy enough, like it's more makes you more happy than miserable, and you can't see yourself not doing that, then do it. But if you're doing it because you're trying to make it in some other way, I think you might be disappointed, because I can tell you this, even the people I know that are a heck of a lot more successful than me, and we're talking people who draw for Marvel and stuff, they still have to do commissions. They still have to bust their hump to get out there and just survive in the industry. So I guess that's my biggest thing I would say is, how much money do you got saved already? Because you're going to blow through it, because you're not going to make any money.
So I thought you produced your own stuff.
I do.
Oh, okay. I got confused there for a second with the publishing and all the rest of that stuff. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean.
I was just going to say, is there any parts of the entire process between writing and publishing and going to cons and all that, is there anything that you like love more than other stuff or hate more than other stuff?
I'm kind of a quiet, not go out in public if I don't have to kind of person. So going to conventions is really good for me. I dread them. I have a panic attack even thinking about them. But dude, I mean, it's so cool when someone comes up to you and they go, I love this book. This is so cool, man. And I don't know, it feels good. So I think the convention thing.
Okay. What's the part you hate the most, other than second guessing and all the rest of the writer stuff? But what part of it is the most challenging for you?
I think it's really just the industry just isn't very hopeful. It's very business motivated. It's very, very cynical. And I've seen some beautiful, sweet people get burned out really early on. I mean, you see this smile on someone's face when they self-produce a comic book, and they got it kickstarted, or whatever the case may be, and they went through all the process and they get some good reviews. And I don't know, I went through the process too, where I'm like, I guess I'm going somewhere. What you don't realize is, no, you're going to continue to work at it and you'll continue to be somewhere, but you're not necessarily ever going somewhere. It never stops. There's not a destination. And I think I'm learning that that's what it's like in any medium, any form of entertainment. There's certain people who make it to the top and most won't. You have to continue to hustle.
Is there any kind of music or stuff you have on in the background, or are you a silent writer?
Music is everything to me. It's one of the reasons why I really want to make movies, because I always have a soundtrack to everything I'm working on. In fact, I write songs for some of the sequences in my comics just so that it kind of still puts in my brain how this would work as a movie. But I really, when I'm in the thick of writing, I don't like anything that has words, so I listen to a lot of classical stuff. But when I'm trying to get in the zone, I listen to the Cramps and the Ramones, because I feel like that old school Marvel comics, like Ramones music. See, what's great about that stuff to me is it comes across as like, oh, anybody could do that. It's like, until you try, you realize that no, it's genius. It's simple, it's genius. And I feel like that's where the good stuff lives, That's why I love punk rock music so much. I always have. And that whole Olympia DIY thing has so much to do with me even attempting to make my own comic book, really.
How neat. Who's your favorite Oli character? Who's your favorite Oli musician? If you had to pick one.
If I had to pick a band, it would probably be Bikini Kill. I was the right age when they came out. Nice. Kathleen Hanna is so awesome, and that band just rocks. I mean, they're so cool, man. All those early days at the Capitol Theater. I mean, my band used to play there a couple times too, but I mean, we never got as big as those bands did naturally. But Olympia has a great history of really great bands. It really does. Such good stuff.
Yeah, Bikini Kill was coming back for a show before all of this stuff happened, and they were it sold out in minutes. I think it was crazy. Everybody was like, "They're back," and it was very exciting.
That's like coming back. Yeah, she's Kathleen's awesome. The whole band is. I'm a huge fan. And then I used to like Kicking Giant and I mean, I was there. I remember when Excuse 17 was a band, and then that later became Slater-Kinney. Like certain members of that band formed Slater-Kinney. And I remember seeing, but I really enjoyed them when they were just playing backstage and all that stuff, you know. And going back even further, God, there's just a ton of history. See, Olympia is an enigma because it seems like there's nothing going on, yet everything is going on in Olympia at any given time. There's just the talent crosses through there. You know, people say, oh, it's, you know, it's like a little mini Portland. It's like, no, I'd say Oli's got its own thing going on. It really does, and it deserves to.
Excellent. Is there anything else you want to say or talk about, or anything before we finish up our interview? Anything I missed?
I think that's about it. And I just want to let people know who are fans of the book. Issue 4 is in the process. We are working on it. If anything, we're trying to get it right because we've got this whole thing about the Namaste Ranch, which is kind of like this hippie sort of Yelm sort of thing going on. So it's going to be really cool, and we're just trying to get it perfect because the whole thing has always been sort of a parody of kind of living around Olympia anyway, and that's why I wanted to put, you know, Blood and Gourd in Olympia, because I just like, this is just the perfect setting for something like this. So that's happening. I'm hoping to finally get that rolling. We're working with an artist named Hus, like I said, from Turkey, who he really wants to do it. In fact, I can provide you a couple of pages of what he's been working on for us, if you guys are interested too. But yeah, I want to thank you again for everything you do for South Puget Sound, man. I mean, you're a powerful presence there. And if people want more Blood and Gourd, or if they want to find out more about it, I'm giving away a free issue of issue number 1, a PDF copy of it. I talked to you a little bit about, and then what else was it? Oh yeah, and if they want to buy the comic, a print copy of it, they can go to WeBleedHalloween.com.
Excellent, cool. Well, it was nice to see you again, and I hope everything goes good. And as soon as your new comics come out, of course, we need to get them on the shelf, our shelf here in Olympia. All right, have a good day. Thank you.
Be safe.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.